So all right. So hello. My name is Heidy Canales, and I'm interviewing.
Hi, I'm Diana Tejada. I'm a Penn State alum from 2012.
Yes, and this is for the Latinx Oral History Archive, and this recording is being taken on November 18th of 2021. So we're going to start off and just get to know a little bit about you and your background and also your just the way that you grew up. So can you start off by letting me know a little bit about like where you were born, when you were born, and like the area that you kind of grew up in?
Yes. So I was born in 1989. I was actually born in the Dominican Republic. And I came to the US when I was 2.5 years old. My family settled in Brooklyn, New York, and I lived in Brooklyn until it was time for me to go to high school. So about like 12 years. When it was time for me to go to high school, my parents had kind of had enough of the New York lifestyle and they bought a house in Reading, Pennsylvania. So I lived in Reading, Pennsylvania for high school, so the 4 years. And then I went to college at Penn State. When I was in high school, I was actually a part of Upward Bound Math and Science. So UBMS. So I actually spent all of my summers at Penn State as part of this trio program. So I spent from freshman year on, I spent 3 summers where I would go to Penn State. I would be at Penn State for 6 weeks. I would take classes in Thomas Building and I would be with other high school students that were part of this program, and a lot of our faculty members were Penn Staters. So I actually had the chance to like work with college professors. And then when it came time to go to college, I was a Button Waller Fellow, and Penn State was just the very natural option for me. And I was first generation. I was the first one in my family to go to college, and Penn State was really a dream in the sense of it was such a good school. I had, great financial help to go there. I was part of the Button Waller Fellowship. So it was really like a dream for me to go on campus.
No, I understand that. I'm also a Button Waller fellow, so small world. So as you mentioned, like you did move around a little bit, but not so much during your childhood. So how would you describe your like the neighborhood that you grew up in, like when you were a child, at least?
So I grew up in Brooklyn. I grew up in East New
Right.
York. And East New York is a very working class community. And it was very immigrant, like very, very immigrant. It was a very immigrant community. So when I went to, for example, like in middle school, everybody was from somewhere else. Like I had friends who were from Bangladesh. I had friends who were from China. I had friends, from Mexico, from Colombia. There was a lot of Dominicans, a lot of Puerto Ricans, a lot of African Americans, and pretty much it was very, very diverse. I remember, maybe I can count on the hand, like the teachers that I had who were white, So I had a very, very diverse childhood growing up, and East New York is a very, working class community. So taxi drivers, bodega workers, salon workers. Outside of, maybe like the doctors and the teachers, I didn't really know a lot of people that went to college. And I do remember when people in the neighborhood did go to college, it was a really big deal. I remember my mom had friends and her 3 daughters were in college, and we were in middle school. My mom was like, you have to meet these girls because you girls have to know there's possibilities. And I remember, it was a really big deal because I think college sometimes, especially if you're from an immigrant community, it seems like a faraway dream. You don't know anybody in your family that's been to college. You know people that work really hard, but you don't necessarily see the path there. And especially East New York, there's no college near. I mean, there is a college nearby, but you don't see the experience of people going away to college. And you don't see the college culture, where your parents are going to, alumni events or people are wearing their sweaters around town. It's a very different culture.
Yeah. How would you describe like your family? So, was your extended family involved in your upbringing, or was it just like your immediate family circle?
So my family is really close knit. We're a small family, but my aunts and uncles would always come to our house. My grandmother lived with us. So I feel like my family is like everybody was really close together. I remember, a lot of people would gather at our house because we had the big backyard. So I always grew up like with family events. When my grandmother would go to the Dominican Republic and she would sometimes spend 6 months there and come back. And for some reason, when she would leave, it was always the biggest party and everybody's always coming to our house and bringing her gifts to give to other people. wishing her well. And that was a really big part of my childhood and growing up. And we didn't really go to the Dominican Republic a lot because, there were three girls. My mom, was a stay-at-home, and my dad worked as a taxi driver. So it wasn't like we had a lot of money for family vacations. But I feel like my family was really close-knit, really influential in how I grew up, and just like really inspiring me, like I remember when my first cousin started going away to college, it kind of became, okay, you're next. And that was a really big part of my upbringing, I think.
Yeah. Did you have any brothers or sisters?
Yeah, so I have an older sister and I have a younger sister. And my older sister went to college, but she had a very different journey than mine because she was in the military. So when I started Penn State, she's in the National Guard, and my freshman year until my junior year, she was deployed in Iraq. So she was active duty while I was an undergrad. And it was a very interesting time. So her and I actually ended up graduating around the same time. She graduated from Kutztown University, but she had a different experience because she didn't live on campus. She was sometimes like she had to pause her studies when she was called, to go to Iraq. And then I had a younger sister who was like 4 years younger than me. So she was still in high school by the time I was in college.
Right. How did your sister having, that military, background kind of have an effect on you? Because I feel like that couldn't have been easy. That could not have been easy at all.
Yeah, so it was really hard because my sister would actually drive me to campus sometimes because my parents went like for winter breaks and things like that. Sometimes it was hard for my dad to take the day off of work. So my sister was like really, really helpful, really involved. And I remember when I was a student, I would email her a lot. This is kind of hard to think about it, but like I didn't have a cell phone my first year on campus, and it wasn't like an out of the world thing. Because Penn State dorm rooms used to have phones. So you had a landline. So I feel like I would just call my parents from the landline. It wasn't
And
like
I think the landlines are still in those buildings. I remember my freshman year, like there's just a random phone in like Rittner.
Yeah, I lived in Pennypacker, and there was definitely a landline. And I feel like I just like would have a set time that I would talk to my parents. And then, I eventually did get a phone, but like this is before. So I remember emailing her a lot and just worrying about her a lot, checking the news, and just really praying, that nothing would happen to her. I remember it's not it's a real thing, but you're like, oh my gosh, if something happens to her, I'm not going to be able to finish college. Like I'm going to have to go back home and, be with my family. So I definitely remember that. And I definitely remember emailing her and writing her letters. So she would mail me a lot of letters and I would mail her a lot of letters. So I always remember I would sit in the stacks. I used to love studying in the stacks. So I would sit in the stacks and write to her. And we would send a lot of emails. And I remember like on campus, like the computer lab in West, that was my favorite computer lab on campus. So I'd be in West, and every now and then I'd be emailing my sister. So it did have an impact on me because you worry about them. And you also don't have access to the news at all times. So you don't know what's happening. So I would always like make sure to check on the newspapers every now and then. And of course, check back home.
Right. And then what did your parents do for a living? Like, as you said, sometimes it was hard to, coordinate schedules and stuff.
So my mother worked at a meatpacking company while I was in college. She worked there, and she actually, I guess you can say, retired the year after I graduated, because essentially she was working to help me with my books and my expenses. And then my dad, when I started college, my dad also worked at a meatpacking company, and then he eventually became a truck driver. So, truck drivers have to drive to get paid. So that's why sometimes it was like really hard for him to take off. And you figure it out. Like I would carpool with people. I would take the bus. I didn't drive. Or my sister would pick me up and take me back. So I definitely was on campus. Obviously I went home for the holidays, but that's kind of the only time I went home, just because it was hard for my parents to, just pick me up. And I think that's probably why I also really needed student organizations, because even though I was only 2.5 hours away from home, it was really hard to get home sometimes. And there was no direct bus from Penn State to Reading. So I would have to take a bus from Penn State to Harrisburg. From Harrisburg, then I would get on a little bus that made like 20 stops until it got to Reading. So a 2.5 hour trip would be like an 8-hour day.
Yeah, no.
I literally only went home Thanksgiving break and Christmas break and then spring break.
That's crazy. Yeah, no, I remember my freshman year, like I definitely would end up going home like once a month. Like, and it was a 3.5 hour drive though, but like it was still easier because I guess, times change. So it's like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Well,
um,
the big thing on campus, like my senior year, my last year was like there was like a dollar bus. It wasn't really a dollar, but it was really
Megabus.
cheap. Yeah, megabus. Like megabus wasn't a thing when I was a freshman.
That's crazy.
Um, and sometimes I'll say it was easier for me to go from Penn State to New York because they would have the Big Apple Express. Like there
Yeah,
was just always more trips to New York than there was to Reading, and Reading's only 2.5 hours away. But such
that's
is life sometimes.
exactly. And would you say that you had any like special occasions that you looked forward to? So you said you only traveled on the holidays. So was there any particular holiday that like, oh, you were always so excited to go home for?
I think Christmas, like the Christmas break, because I feel like the Thanksgiving break, you go home and it's like, okay, you have to go back to campus, you have finals. Versus I always loved going home for Christmas break because I got to see my family. I got to see my extended family. My family was super proud of me, especially because I did go away to college. And that was only possible because I was a Button Waller fellow,
Mhm.
because I did, have room and board covered in addition to tuition. And, Penn State back then, it wasn't cheap. It's not cheap now,
Still not.
especially not, I don't know how it is now in comparison to the state universities, but my parents were always super proud of me. So I loved going back home. I remember my neighbors too would make it a big deal when I was back home.
Aw.
People would always ask me, how's your semester going? How are you doing? And it was really cool. So I always looked forward for winter break. That was like my favorite one.
Did you have any like favorite memories, at least like either before college or during college that, just stick out to you?
Yes. So I have two. It's really hard. So when I started the Dominican Student Association, I remember I had a part-time job on campus, and I remember I didn't know any Dominican people. I was sitting in classes and it was just me, and I went to a high school that had a lot of Dominican kids, and a lot of Latino kids, a lot of Black kids. And Penn State sometimes can look like a sea of white to you.
Yep.
And I remember, like I worked in West Dining Halls, and someone came in, and I was like, wait, this kid's talking Spanish to somebody else. And when I got to know the person, they were Dominican, and they had like a very similar upbringing. So slowly, I started meeting more Dominican people, and it was really interesting because I feel like I had met other Latino students at Penn State. I had met a lot of Latino students at the Button Waller program, but a lot of them were very, very different, because I remember meeting Latinos whose parents were professors at other universities. And I was like, what? Like, you're a college professor? Or like meeting someone whose dad was the mayor of a town in Puerto Rico. And to me, that was so mind boggling because my parents were essentially factory workers.
Yeah.
And like I definitely was part of, the low income box of, I used to, and I don't have any problem saying this, but like, I remember looking at Penn State tuition, and when I would add up tuition, room and board, it was more than what my mom made in the year, or it was always like really close. So for me, I always remember I always remember when I would meet Dominican people because a lot of them had very similar experiences to me. They were literally first generation. They were low income. They were the first people in their family to go away to college. So the memory that really sticks out to me was when it came time to start the Dominican Student Club. So we reserved a room in the library, a study room, right? Because we're not a student org, we can't get a room on campus. I don't know anybody else who can do a room reservation for me. So we met in the library, and I'll never forget because I was like, okay, I'm gonna invite some people that I know and maybe they'll bring other Dominican students. And we had maybe like 20 people there, and we just started brainstorming and what kind of events do you want to do? And do we even really want to do this? And that memory always sticks out to me because here I was a freshman and these people are, sophomores and juniors and seniors, and I don't really know them. And then we were like, okay, we're doing this. And we did an event. And then we got registered on campus. And I feel like I never forget that. It was April, I want to say it was April 6th. And that was such a big day for us because it was like we had this idea. So I think that memory always sticks out because I think in my head, I started the Dominican Student Association because obviously like I felt lonely. And I didn't see people on campus who looked like me, but I knew that they were there. Maybe there weren't as many as I thought, but they were there. And then we had our first meeting and we had like over 50 people come out.
Whoa.
And we had Dominican students that I had never seen on campus, that I didn't know, that, didn't that, you know, they didn't live in Pennypacker. They didn't belong to any organizations. And we met so many people that way. And I never forget that. The second one that I never ever forget was the first Noche Latina that we did, because we changed the structure. So previous to that, Noche Latina was a paid sit down dinner event. So at the time, we didn't have Latino Caucus. When I became president, we really didn't have the money to do a sit down dinner event. And I always also thought, like, you know, you have a lot of students who they can't necessarily afford $30, $50, you know, for like a plated dinner for an event. And I was like, you know, why don't we just open it up to everybody, make it a free event, make it as big as possible. And I'll never forget, we had like 350 people in the room. We had that year, we had a lot of candidates. But I'll never forget seeing a full room and being like, wow, people are here to see this event. And it was so big because I think we planned it in like 3 months, an event that usually, you know, you'd be planning for all year. And it was like, is this event going to happen? And then it happened. And I'll never forget so many people there. Like, that was insane.
That's great. That's what I need to happen again.
That's what we need again. Yes.
Exactly. So I guess kind of, you know, going back to this, okay, you had the opportunity to come to Penn State, you know, full ride, you know, everything covered. Let's say before that. So thinking about before you received the Button Waller Fellowship, why did you even consider college to begin with? Like, was it always something you had your mind on, or was it something that, you know, over time it became more in your, like, something more in your brain?
So something that's interesting is like, for me was, I was really bright as a kid. And I actually got skipped a grade, but then I didn't like it. And I asked them to please put me back to please put me back in second grade. Because I did not want to be with the older kids. But you know, I feel like from a young age, I feel like teachers always encouraged me. I remember in middle school, I got so many awards. And my middle school used to rank us, and I was always like in the top 5. And I feel like my teachers always really encouraged me. And when I lived in New York, I took the specialized test to go to one of the special high schools. We ended up moving, so it ended up not mattering for me. But I feel like from a young age, I didn't know what college was. I didn't know a lot of people that went to college. But I feel like teachers and even my principal from elementary school, they would always tell my mom, you know, this little girl, she can be anything that she wants to be. And then when I went to high school, college was still really far away, but the Upward Bound program that I was in at Penn State was life changing. So that program, the way that they, you know, and I still think they're on campus, but you would go up for 6 weeks. You would also do SAT classes. We took Latin over the summer, and we used to do research. So you would do research with a college professor. And I never forget my first year. My group was paired up with a professor from Earth and from EMS, from Earth Mineral and Sciences College. And I think that was the first time I was like, oh man, like I want to be an engineer when I grow up. And so I feel like that program and the fact that I did get to go to Penn State for the summers, I was a freshman and I didn't even know if my parents were going to say yes, because in my head, my parents didn't let me sleep over anywhere. So when I came home with the permission slip and the application to go and stay on campus for 6 weeks, I'm like, oh, I don't know if these people are going to say yes. But my dad was like, oh, this is a college prep program. I don't know what this is, but this sounds like really serious. And they said yes. And I feel like I was a freshman and it was the end of my freshman year in high school, and doing that program just really like shifted my mind, because it was like, I can be all of these things now. And I see the path for how I get to college.
Do you think that your parents pushed college on you or no?
Not necessarily. I think what my parents pushed on me was hard work. And making something of yourself. And I know that my mom, especially because my mom was a factory worker, like my mom would tell us, she's like, you know, study, estudien para que sean gente. And my mother would be like, you know, I want you guys to, and my dad, he'd be like, I want you to work and go to a job where you can dress like a professional and sit in an air conditioned office. And so I don't know that they necessarily were like college, but they were like study so that you can become something.
So education always played that, like, I think like very common in, I think, Latino households in general, is like they place a lot of value on education, and, you know, education is a way out. And honestly, like it is, like it genuinely is.
It is completely a game changer. And I think like my parents, I don't know that they necessarily like, it's not like, oh, you have to go to this school. Like I remember applying to colleges and I was like, oh, I want to get out of Reading, Pennsylvania. I want to go far, and applying to lots of colleges. And I remember when the scholarship letters would start coming, and I had really, obviously like my parents didn't make a lot of money, but I also won a lot of scholarships. And for my parents, that was just they were so proud, because it was like, I was going to go to college, and they were only going to have to help me with like books and like minor expenses. But when you think of how expensive college is, you realize like, wow, if I only have to help my kids with books, like that's amazing.
Yeah.
So
How many other schools did you apply to, and do you remember which ones
so
they
I
were?
applied to a lot of Big Ten schools. So I applied to like Iowa, University of Iowa. I applied to Ohio State. I applied to, where else did I apply to? I think I applied to like St. John's University, New York.
Mhm. I applied there too.
So I think I only applied to 5 other schools, because at the time we had the Common App, but you
Yeah.
had to pay. So I think it was only like 5 schools. I also applied to and was accepted for a special program with an HBCU in Georgia.
Mhm.
And the way the program would work is you would go to that HBCU for 3 years, and then you would go to either Penn State or Georgia State for 2 years in your master's.
Wow.
So that was a really interesting experience, because I did travel down to the school, and it was really interesting because I had visited other HBCUs, and HBCUs make a very compelling case for, if you're a minority student, why you would be more successful there. But ultimately, it wasn't a good fit for me because it was really far away, and all I could think about was like, my parents aren't going to be able to afford a plane flight. Like, they're not going to be able to fly me home for Thanksgiving. And when you're a high school student, you're like, I want to get away, but I don't want to get away that far.
I feel like I was the opposite. I feel like I was like, I'm ready to go.
Ready to go. Where are you from?
I'm from Maryland, so it's not even that far. It's like right around the corner. But like I was really that kid in high school. I was like, I'm ready to go. I want to go far. I applied to everywhere, but I ended up in Pennsylvania. So there's that.
Well, no, I feel you. And I feel like I was the same way. And I think the only reason why I was like, oh, maybe I don't want to go so far was I had a high school teacher who her children had gone to Penn State.
Mhm.
And she was, I think what she always told me, she's like, Penn State is far away that your parents are not going to be able to just like pop up on campus. Like, no one's going to drive 3 hours to like surprise you. But you will also be able to come home on a weekend if you're ever homesick. And she's like, do you really want to be worried about like saving up for a flight and all this stuff? So I was like, oh,
Yeah, I felt that one. I did feel that one. So when it finally came down to it, you were getting in your car, packing up to go to Penn State for the first time. What did it feel like? What was that feeling?
I was really ecstatic, but I was also really nervous. So my parents weren't able to drop me off my first day. So I had to take the bus, and then I remember rolling my suitcase all the way so the bus at the time dropped me off like where Thomas building is.
Okay.
And I remember having to like roll around my suitcase, not realizing, there's a white loop, there's a blue loop, and really unpacking for myself. And I was really excited, but I feel like the first time I unpacked, I was like, oh, I don't have nearly as much stuff as everybody else has. People are loading out TVs and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh, I don't really have a lot. I just have this like one big suitcase. I didn't even, and like, the other thing was I was the first person in my family to go away to college. Like, my cousins had gone to college, but they were all commuters. So I was like, I knew I had to bring toiletries. I had been to Penn State, so I knew like what the dorms looked like, but I didn't realize like, oh, I didn't bring as much stuff as other people did.
Right. And do you think that had any effect, at least on your first semester? I feel like
Yes, absolutely. Because I feel like Penn State's a very social place. And I always remember, like Friday nights, everybody in the dorm is getting dressed up. Everybody's ready to go out. And I'm like, I don't really have party clothes. I have like sneakers and like what I wear to class, but like I didn't know to bring party outfits. And I didn't know to bring party outfits. And I work a job on campus, but I was like, I don't know. It didn't seem to be my scene. And I remember being a freshman, and I did go to like frat row the first weekend. And very quickly, I was like, I don't think this is my scene. I don't think like this is who I am as a person. I also was on a scholarship, so I was also terrified of ever getting in trouble, because the button waller, I'm sure they still tell you this today, but I remember we used to have to meet like once a week or something like that. And you learn very quickly that if you get in trouble with university police, that's like grounds for your scholarship. And And I also felt like I knew like I couldn't get too wild, because if I got too wild, my parents were gonna come pick me up. And I did see that happen. Like freshman year, there was someone on my floor. I think she got a little too wild, and her parents were like, "Nope, you can't stay at Penn State." So I was also 17 my whole entire freshman semester.
The entire
The entire freshman semester, I was 17. I graduated college at 17, and I didn't turn 18 until December. So I think I turned 18 like finals week.
Yeah, I didn't turn 18 until, well, my birthday's in September. So like I started college at 17 and then like I turned 18.
Yeah, and it's a little different when you start, because you're like, everybody's 18 and you're like, I'm still technically a minor. Like I remember, and this is, banking's really different now, but I remember having, a bank account at Wachovia Bank, which doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And PNC is the big bank, and I couldn't open an account at PNC because I wasn't 18, and my parents weren't on campus to open an account for me. So the moment I turned 18, I was like, I need a PNC account.
I need a bank account. And see, those are the things that you don't even think about. Like as a 17-year-old, you're not going to think about the fact that you need you're going to need a card, something to deposit money into. Like,
and the thing is, like, banking is so different now. Like when I was a freshman and I needed money, like I had to call my parents. My parents had to go to the physical bank. There's none of this it's not like now you can PayPal, Venmo anybody from your phone. So I remember, I would have to wait 2 or 3 days for the money to clear, for me to have money in my account. And it was very different. So completely different experience. But I think freshman year and that first like freshman experience, moving in weekend, you almost realize like you're very different here. You're very different from everybody else. And you are going to have to find your own way and make your own way. I felt like sometimes, I remember talking to my roommate had a very similar experience to me. She was like the first person in her college family to go away. But it was very different because like, the people on my floor were very different from me. And not only were they different because it's very different when it's like you're different because you're a person of color and you're low income. Like I feel like it just like compounds how different you feel sometimes. And it's different when you're coming to campus and you're like, oh wow, I'm the broke kid on campus and I'm a person of color and I'm very different from all of you.
Like a double negative. It's just double negative that like, doesn't even out. It just adds more hardship.
Yeah, you're like, oh, this is hard.
Yes. Okay, so I know you said that you spent all your summers here at Penn State. So you obviously had some type of impression of Penn State before you came, and like before you even were like a full-time student here. So would you say that, your impressions lived up to the experience that you ended up having after 4 years? Or was it just completely not what you expected?
I'm going to say that it was not what I expected. And the reason I'm going to say that is because I had a really positive impression of Penn State. Okay. I had a really positive impression. And I always felt like, especially when you're up there, you're a high school kid, you're looking at everything, you're seeing everything. I felt like I knew I was going to come to Penn State and get a really good education. I knew that for a fact. And I think what I didn't expect was how much Penn State would change me as a person. And I don't think I understood that Penn State was going to see that I was going to grow the way that I was going to grow at Penn State. When I was in, the summer program that I would go up for, we would take classes. I would sit in Dyke building, like as a high school student. And that was so funny because I had classes there. So you see that, but I didn't expect how much Penn State was going to change me and how much I was going to grow. I didn't go to Penn State thinking I'm going to start my own student org, I'm going to be a student leader. I was involved in high school at club on the club level. Like I was like history club and French club. I did not expect that I would go to Penn State and start a Dominican student association and become president of Latino Caucus. And that I would sit in meetings with like, President Spanier or Vice President Sims at the time and advocate for other students. I had no expectation or idea that I was going to do those things. So Penn State was very different than what I expected.
That's really interesting. Do you think that those, like, I guess that shattering of expectations, do you think that it played a role in like maybe like your career choice after Penn State?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things, so I started Penn State as an engineering student, and really quickly I decided that it wasn't for me, and that I really liked people, working with people and helping others and making the world a better place. So I switched into geography, and ultimately I graduated with Latin American Studies. But something that I feel like Penn State really helped me see is that part of your career becomes what you study, but it's also the skills that you have. And at Penn State, I feel that I developed skills that really helped me in my career. So I did Teach for America after I graduated, and I stayed in the classroom, and I've had a really interesting experience. In my first 5 years, I was selected as a rookie teacher, and I was a finalist in my region. And my region is like, my district is 40,000 people. So the fact that I was like a top 5 finalist in a district of 40,000 people, I felt like it was really interesting.
Right.
But I feel that it also, my Penn State experience, I think, has taught me that there's so much that you do outside of what your main thing is. Because at Penn State, ultimately, everybody's a student, right? All the students are students, and you have your credits. And what Penn State taught me is that whether you do 12, 15, or 18 credits, you can make a really big impact in what you do outside of that time.
Yeah.
And I think that has shaped my career in the sense of it's allowed me, I'm on boards of nonprofits. I volunteer a lot. I've been on different committees. I've helped with campaigns. And I feel like Penn State, my experience at Penn State being a student leader taught me that I'm like a little octopus. I can have my hands in a lot of different things outside of what my main thing is. So my main thing now is I'm a teacher. I'm a really good teacher. I teach at a magnet school, and I get to impact, hundreds of lives every day. But I also see that I can help out in my community. So I can mentor young teachers. I'm on a board of a nonprofit. I help raise money. I've consulted, political candidates. And I don't think I would have been able to see that I could be multifaceted if it wasn't for my experience at Penn State.
And do you think that when you were at Penn State that, the people around you understood like where you were coming from in terms of like your culture and stuff like that? Or do you think it was more of like okay, I get it, but like.
So I think it's interesting. I think it depends who it was, So when I was at Penn State, I minored in Latino Studies. So I feel like my Latino Studies professors, I feel like they understood me because I think a lot of them were first generation. Sorry, I'm charging my laptop. A lot of them were first generation. A lot of them were first time professors, in their families. They were the first ones to earn PhDs. And I feel like those people understood me. I feel like the people in the PRCC understood me. I feel like the director of the PRCC could speak to my experiences as a student of color, first generation, low income. When it came to my peers, I feel like in the Dominican Student Association, I feel like those people could understand me because they had similar experiences. A lot of, and I say this, a lot of our DSA members, they were first generation. They were the first in their family to go to college. A lot of them were out of state. So I feel like they understood me. Student leaders, I think student leaders, it depended where they were from. And I do think that student leaders all speak a common language of wanting to leave something better. And I feel like they understood me. But sometimes I feel like people in my class, I didn't know a lot of people in my class, but I feel like they didn't, I don't know. I don't think people knew what it was like to be different or, I felt like I walked campus in awe every day of like, oh my gosh, I get to be here. And people are like, oh, it's just Penn State.
Yeah, no, I get that for sure. I really do. And then do you think that, your friends though understood, like even like, let's say they weren't a part of like your cultural background. Do you think that they understood, or it was more of like, I have to explain myself sometimes?
So the reason I will say that my friends understood me, but the caveat to that is that all my friends were either in DSA or Latino Caucus with me.
Gotcha.
Or they were like one of my really good friends, I'm still really good friends with her. She was the president of MASA, the Mexican Student Association. So I felt like she understood me. And I feel like my friendships, my first year, my friendships were based on like people who lived on my floor, people I took classes with. And those people I don't think understood me. But then when I went into the space of student leadership, student leaders of color, presidents of, cultural organizations, I feel like those people understood me and I didn't have to explain myself because they all had a similar background.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then did you feel supported by them though?
So this one's challenging, and this one I'll say yes and no. But the thing is that when you are a student leader on campus and you are leading an organization, those people tend to be big picture people. And you tend to think about not only the events of the semester, but you think about the larger picture, the larger issue. And you think about, especially once you start, when I feel like, president of Latino Caucus, I can say this. When you're the president of Latino Caucus, the information that you have access to is very different than when you're the president of the Dominican Student Association or the Puerto Rican Student Association. You start to be invited to meetings and events that are very different from the things that are available to just regular organization presidents. So I remember going to board of trustee meetings and listening to the kind of things that they were deciding, buildings, football programs, and so you start to see that. Then you start to get invited to, I remember I was on hiring committees. I was on hiring committees for the Paul Robeson Cultural Center. I was a part of a task force that had to advise the president. I was on the Hub Committee Advisory Board. And when you're on those committees, the information is completely different. So people don't understand. I feel like people didn't understand what I was fighting for. Yeah. And, one of the things at the time is like student aid. Student aid's always been a big issue. Penn State, when I was on campus, tuition every year was like 4% going up this year, 4% next year. And something that I feel like people didn't understand is that people didn't understand that if we didn't advocate for ourselves, if we weren't loud, we weren't going to get more Latino professors on campus. We weren't going to have a Latino Studies program. We weren't going to have, anything else. And at the time, I feel like people didn't understand me because I felt like I had all this weight on my shoulders. And I realized that some of it is you have to be, you're a big vision person and you think big. And sometimes I think as a college student now, I'm like, why was I, like, you think about it now and you're like, whoa, I was really like worried about really big issue things that college students on their own can't fix.
Yeah.
And, and I remember like talking to board members and explaining to them how many Latinos are in Pennsylvania. And if Penn State doesn't get it together and start providing more scholarship dollars, you are going to lose all this talent. And they're like, oh, so there's like really a lot of Latinos. And it's like, yeah, have you seen the census report?
Like, haven't you been in the United States for the past 20 years? Like,
and the thing is, like, you have a lot of people who don't get it and they go through college and they don't understand, or they don't understand like the impact that it makes when, I remember there was a Dominican professor on campus, and when people met her, she came to a DSA meeting. And for people who are first generation to see, wow, here's a 10-year track Dominican professor, like, wow. And she's young and you don't see that. And you see these professors and they can barely pronounce your name. And I think that makes like a really big impact on people. And people don't realize, I think, that other schools have a lot more. And other schools have a lot more support for their Latino students. And I remember having friends from Yale, they have a whole house. They have like, they have a Casa Latina, and you're like, what? Yeah. Like we barely have like 2 offices in the Hub.
No,
and you
barely.
think about it, barely. And it's like, and you don't realize that when you're an undergrad or when you are on only one side of it, you don't realize we have this little office that we can't access Saturday and Sunday. And UPUA gets their whole office whenever they want. And they have a couch in there. And, they have these huge offices. And you don't realize those disparities until you are on the student leadership side of it.
Yep.
So people sometimes, when you're the president of like Black Caucus, Latino Caucus, you deal and you have access to information that other people just don't.
Yeah. I feel like talking to you, it's just like, wow, like I get it. Like I get it so much. Like
very similar experience,
Very similar experiences. And I another question is like kind of going off of like, not necessarily feeling supported 100% of the time. Like what kept you grounded, to like your roots? Like what kept you fighting for your, I guess your culture?
Something that I feel like is, the Dominican Student Association for me was a lot easier to start and keep going because we were new. There were a lot of events for us. We would do a lot of things. And the thing that always kept me grounded was our members. So we, at our general body, we would have members, and you would have members come out who were quiet, who were shy. And, it's now thinking about it, you realize that what grounds you is those relationships with people. And I remember for Latino Caucus and DSA, I had people who were freshmen. Oh my gosh, I want to get involved. How can I help? And it's like, wow, how wonderful. There is something for you on campus to do, to give your time and talent to. And I remember for DSA, we would have, I have someone really special. I remember when we were at the Hub, we have our whole board presentation. We have pictures in the Dominican flag. Somebody walked back, this guy, he walks over he does a double take and he's like, there's a Dominican student group on campus. And I'm like, welcome. And it was like family. And I think, you know, for people, it's like, this was a place to build family, to build community. And we had so many people from so many parts of campus that would have never crossed paths.
Yeah.
And the thing with student organizations is not everybody is not everybody is an extrovert, and Penn State can be hard if you're not if you're an introvert. And the beauty of an organization and the beauty of Latino Caucus is you could be a freshman, you could be a sophomore, you could be a senior, and you come to a meeting and there's people to share with, there's people to connect with, there are events to go to together. You know, when I did Latino Caucus, we would always have committees, and the committees would like plan the events. And I remember the committee that planned the first Noche Latina. It was a bunch of freshman girls planning this big event on campus. But you know, you realize now, and when you're, and that's what keeps you grounded. And you don't think about it now, but 10 years later, I'll tell you, there are people who are married with children who met at a Dominican student body meeting. The babies are young. Don't get me wrong, the babies are young. But there are so many people who I'm like, oh, you didn't know each other until you met at a Dominican student, you know,
Right.
you know, election. Or, hey, you two are best friends and your friendship started on a committee for, you know, for Noche Latina.
That's crazy.
So I feel like definitely the relationships that I started with people kept me grounded. And you have so many events and you see what comes of those events. And I think that keeps you grounded.
And then kind of going back now to, you know, your studies, like the actual, you know, education side of Penn State. Like, so you said you changed your major a couple times. So what would you say was like your easiest class at the time, and then your hardest class?
Yes. So I think my easiest class was Latino Studies 100. And the reason I say that that class was so easy was because growing up, especially growing up in an immigrant community with a lot of Latino people, you hear a lot of stories, right? So I knew people who had crossed the border. I also knew people who had been here their whole lives, who, you know, belonged to, you know, they were Puerto Rican or belonged to another group. And you don't understand when you're growing up, you're like, man, why does New York have so many Puerto Ricans? Or why are Puerto Ricans US citizens? So the reason that class was my easiest class was the professor was amazing. The class was really interesting, and I feel like it was so applicable. Everything that I learned in that class I had heard about, but also it was an opportunity for me to learn more about myself and the community that I identified with. My hardest class. I think my hardest class, I would have to say, I changed my major, but definitely Chem 101. Chem 101 I thought was
still gets people.
I was freshman year. The textbook was like $300. And the class was really hard. And I didn't realize that people paid for private tutors, or that people bought notes. I don't know if that's a thing anymore, but like you could buy lecture notes.
Yep.
Here I'm in class, like scribbling crazy, trying to catch everything. Next thing I know, the person next to me has bought the notes from Nittany Notes. And I'm like, what?
Those bright green packets.
And you're like, what? Or the fact that if you're struggling with chem, you could pay somebody. I didn't even think you could pay somebody to tutor you. And so I was like, oh, the girl next door is struggling, but she's paying someone. So Chem 101 was definitely really hard for me. I did get by with a C, and that was my first C in college, and I was devastated. And I was like, I can't do this engineering thing. This isn't for me. So I think that one was up there.
So what about living in State College in general? Because obviously State College is in the middle of nowhere. Like, you probably know better than anybody.
Yeah, very middle of nowhere. I think, you know, State College is really hard. And I think it's hard because when you're a freshman, you know, everything downtown, you have like, you know, now there's like a Target, you know, but before, when I was an undergrad, you had to take the bus to go to Walmart or Target. And if you're taking the bus anywhere, you're not bringing that much stuff home. The other thing is like, if you're homesick, there's no food for you. You know, when I was in undergrad, I think there was like a Mexican restaurant it wasn't even in campus, it was in State College, but that's very different than Dominican food. And the other thing is like, you know, downtown, I'm not sure, I don't know if it's this way now, but it was like a bunch of swanky shops. It's like, I can't afford to shop in here. I can barely afford to go to school
Still
here.
like that. It's still like that.
Still like that. I was like, I went a few years ago. I'm like, oh, they haven't closed this down. Who's buying these? You know? So I think State College, I think in that sense was really hard. I didn't spend a lot of time off campus. I lived off campus my last year, and it wasn't terrible. I lived close by. But I do realize that when you leave the campus, the town is very not like anything on the campus. So on campus, you can have your little bubble that is very diverse, that's very culturally aware, and then you get off campus and people look at you funny. Welcoming town, but just very different.
Yeah, I agree. What about in terms of like living circumstances here in State College in comparison to maybe like New York or Reading? Like what were some of the differences you noticed?
One of the things that's really different, I think, is like Penn State is very picturesque and Penn State is very beautiful. And I say this to this day, I follow the Instagram and I'm like, oh, how do we get to go to school in such a beautiful place? The Penn State grounds, the Penn State buildings, they keep everything pristine and in such a great condition. And when you visit a lot of other universities, you're like, oh, this isn't that nice. And Penn State, I think, makes everything very, very nice, makes everything beautiful. And it is very different. So I would say that, like Penn State like has an attention to detail, and you're never going to go into anywhere in Penn State and look at something old and dingy. Real world is
that's literally, and now it's all about modernizing everything here. Like they build buildings with this, sleek architecture. Like that's the name of the game now.
And Penn State, and you don't realize it, but like our dorms, even our dorms that may seem outdated, they are nothing compared to other schools like dingy dorms.
Rittner is pretty bad.
Yeah, well, Rittner's always been kind of funky. It was like they were building it when I was there. Then they had a dining hall there, so I don't know.
Interesting. So let's see. So you touched on your extracurriculars. So you said DSA, Latino Caucus, anything that wasn't culturally based that you
Yeah, so I was on the Commission for Women, and the Commission for Women was very insightful for me because on the Commission for Women, I was one of the few students on the group, and we would meet, every so often in the semester. And our meetings were always with, professors, faculty, and staff member at Penn State. And it was very interesting to learn about the disparities or the issues that women at Penn State faced. Especially when you think about Penn State leadership at the time was very male dominated. Deans, the majority of your deans are men. And for me being an undergrad and being on that commission, I really love that commission. I was on the commission my sophomore and junior year. And then my junior year, I was like, I really want to, focus on graduating and I can't do these meetings. But that commission was also really interesting because you learn about the problems the university has. And for example, when I was an undergrad, there was a really big problem with sexual assault. And we were, the committee would get the numbers and we would read the reports. And something that we had to, come up with is like, what kind of solutions? This is affecting a lot of women. This is affecting female students at Penn State. Like, what can the university do to really shift the culture? So then I was a part of a campaign. We presented solutions to the president. So that was really influential for me because I remember one of the chairs of the committee, she was an assistant dean, and I was a student, and I think that she could have taken the approach of, oh, she's just a student on the committee. But for her, she was just like, oh, we're going to use this as an opportunity to help you develop and to help you learn about this. So when it came time to give the presentation to the president of Penn State, she had me do it. And I was so nervous. I was like, I'm not ready for this. But she's like, no, she's like, you have to do it. She's like, you're a student. You're not going to get this chance again. And I remember she worked with me for how to present this information to the president at the time. And I was so nervous, but it was such an amazing opportunity. And it teaches you, you can talk to anybody in any room. And I learned that at, 19, 20 years old. And I'm like that now. I'm like, oh, I'll talk to anybody. Bring me the president. Let me explain to him what my
right. Let me tell him what's wrong, what he could do better.
Let me explain and let me advocate. And it's a transformative experience. I was also on UPUA. I was an advisor for the UPUA president. He was, I think, maybe the third Black president of Penn State at the time. I was on the handbook committee. So they brought back the Penn State handbook, the S book for freshmen, and I got to be a part of that. And that was really cool. I was on a couple of other things, but those were the big ones that were not culturally based.
And then you mentioned that you used to love going into the stacks. Was that like your favorite place to study?
So it was between the stacks and then the law school building. When they finished the law school building, I was a junior, I was a senior. I figured out how to get in there. Eventually, they made it a lot harder eventually. I feel like eventually, like it wasn't as easy then. But I used to love studying in the law building because it was very quiet. I was never going to run into anyone that I knew there. So definitely one of my favorite places.
And then you also mentioned that you were working part-time. What did you do working?
So I worked at West Hall. I worked in the dining, making wraps. I don't know if that store is still there. I worked there, and then I was an assistant TA for a professor, like my senior year. And then what else did I work on campus? And I think that was pretty much it. Once I started getting involved in student leadership, I couldn't work anymore because it's like you're scheduling meetings and it just doesn't work that way. You're like, oh, I'll take a financial hit.
Yeah. And then what about like your experience? I don't know, I'm not entirely sure if you ever had any internship experience, or what was that kind of process like at the time?
So I did have a couple of internship experiences back home. At Penn State, I did a work study experience my freshman year. It was great. It taught me a lot about office culture. And you may not realize it, but if nobody in your family has ever worked at an office culture is, very different.
Yeah.
I also interned at City Hall back home. I interned with the mayor's office. I was 20. It was a great experience. I feel like it really taught me just how office work, how government works. And I really did enjoy that. I didn't secure my internship through Penn State. But it did help that I went to Penn State because then when I would go back home, it's, Penn State's a notable school.
Yeah.
So and then I did intern with other campaigns, but that was it wasn't something that like I secured through Penn State.
Makes sense. So would you say that it was accessible though to get internships through Penn State at the time, or not necessarily?
The reason I would say that it wasn't as accessible is because a lot of the internships are unpaid.
Yeah.
And I could not do unpaid internships. So I was paid. I was at the mayor's office and I was paid. I was on campaigns and I was paid. The other thing that was hard is like sometimes a lot of the internships, they require you to move somewhere. They require you to live somewhere, and they require you to pay all your own expenses, and they don't pay you. So I would have loved, I love government work, and especially now I'm in education, but I you can't do an internship experience if you're not getting paid. I had friends who did the DC experience and it was really hard for them. And then if you want your Penn State credits, if you want Penn State to give you credits, then you have to pay for it too. And it just gets really expensive at some point. And it's for a first generation student, it's cost prohibitive.
It's not really feasible.
I can go live at home and live for free and get paid, but I can't do an unpaid internship. And I couldn't do unpaid in college.
Yeah, no, I felt that too. Okay, so how about for fun? Like, what were some of the things that you did for fun? So outside of school, outside of, your org work, type of things.
So that's really interesting because I feel like my org work was my social life. I remember DSA, not all of us, and it wasn't like an official activity. We would get together and watch the baseball games and study. So whenever the Yankees would play, we would like all sit in front of the hub and play and watch it. Definitely like hang out with friends, get coffee, get ice cream downtown. There used to be a really good ice cream place. Anything food related, I think was fun. But definitely spend, just hanging out. I wasn't really like into parties unless like my organization was hosting them. So yeah, I think that kind of covers it. I didn't really do football games either.
You weren't really into the whole
I couldn't
football.
I couldn't afford it. I think that was like the biggest thing is like I didn't get season tickets freshman year, and then I did end up going to games and stuff, but like I couldn't regularly go to games.
Yeah. What about tailgates? Were you a part of the tailgate culture?
Not until like my senior year. So when I joined PN, then I was like, oh, tailgates, this is really cool. So I did enjoy tailgates, and I did go to other basketball sporting events. I mean, Penn State events. So I would go see gymnastics. That was always fun. Basketball team was great. So it was always cool to see volleyball games and things like that. Not football, but definitely a lot of the others.
All the other ones. Yeah, that makes sense.
Performances. I would always go to the hub performances.
Yes.
So when they would do, the drag shows, or when they would do like the Asian Pacific American Caucus would host like these big shows, I would definitely go to those.
Oh, that's cool. And then what about like just in general, overall Penn State? Do you have any special memories? So now, remember the first question I asked you was about lifetime. Yeah. Now it's more centralized.
That was really hard. I think I have so many. And And
Tell me about this. Do you feel pride in being a Penn Stater?
yes, I will tell you that I'm immensely proud of being a Penn Stater. And I think the reason I'm so proud of it is because, I'm 10 years out. And I'll be 10 years out in May. And I am always so proud to be a Penn Stater. And I'm so proud of what I did on Penn State. And I think that's why I'm really proud, because I think I could have gone to Penn State and just have been a student and had the student experience. But I feel like because I started an organization, I helped bring back an organization, I re-envisioned an organization. I think that changed my life and it changed who I was as a person. And I feel immensely proud. I'm still really close to my friends from campus. And you don't realize like how unique that is until you talk to other people and they're like, oh, I don't even talk to the people I went to college with. And I'm like, what? Those are some of my best friends. Those are the people at my wedding. What do you mean? And I feel like I'm really lucky in that sense. So very, very proud to be a Penn Stater.
And then, kind of looking back at your time while you were here, and then even like just our brief conversation before this, what do you think that Penn State could do to help Latinx students?
So I think one of the things that Penn State can do to help Latinx students, I think the first thing has to do with financial aid. I would like to see Penn State offer more scholarships, and I would like to see more scholarships that are need-based and not, I believe, I do understand that, students need to keep a certain GPA, but for example, a 3.0 GPA can be very hard for an engineering student who this is their first time around. So I would like to see more scholarships. I would like to see Penn State hire more faculty of color, more Latino professors. And I would like to see them keep them, especially when they get to the 10-year track. I don't want us to lose, the professors because they don't make tenure. I want it to be a more supportive place. The other thing that I would say is I would like to see Penn State recruit more out of the Pennsylvania high schools that have large Latino student populations. We're losing these kids and they're going to the smaller colleges and they're going elsewhere. And it's not because they're not as bright or they're not as talented or they wouldn't hack it at Penn State. Is I think because Penn State doesn't recruit them the same way. I know that Penn State doesn't recruit that much at all academically, but I do think that there's a space there. And then the last thing I think I would say is I think that Penn State should do more to support and develop Latino student leaders, because Latino student leaders at Penn State are going to be the leaders of this country. And I think there's a Latino alumni who she is one of the first council members in New York. She's one of the first queer council members. And when you think about it, she was a Penn State student, and I always want to know, like, I wonder what was her experience. Now she's an elected official. How did Penn State help develop her? And I think that it's imperative because our country is going to need more Latino leaders across all these fields. And Penn State has them. I just think Penn State needs to develop them, support them, and really, help them graduate, but also help them be successful at Penn State, because if they're successful there, they'll be successful anywhere.
I agree, for sure. I think it's being intentional. I think that's the part that's missing. It's like
Yes.
being intentional.
And there's a lot of programs, and Penn State has a lot of resources, but I think there's an intentionality lacking.
Yeah.
Finally, the last thing I have 5 things. I would like to see Penn State put more effort into re-engaging Latino alumni. I think our alumni are doing amazing, incredible things. And I only wish that there was something that could help alumni tap back into younger students, because I would have loved to connect with alumni who were 10, 15, 20 years out of college when I was a freshman and a sophomore, because I think we have a different perspective.
Yeah, you guys definitely do.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I wish there was an easy way to do it. Like, because even for this project, like, it's been really difficult to try to get in contact with alumni.
And I have more for you. The thing is, we don't have an alumni Latino interest group. And the thing that makes the interest group hard is that we're spread out all across the country, and we don't have enough traction from what I understand. And there was a Latino alumni interest group at one point, and then new people took it over, and not much happens with it, but we're spread out. So like, for example, when I go to the Miami Penn State things, I'm usually one of the only people of color.
Are you based in Miami?
Yeah, I live in Miami.
Oh, wow. My mom actually recently moved down there.
Oh, if you come, I'm taking you out.
Literally on Monday, I'll be in Miami. That's crazy.
You have to text me now, because now I have to take you to get food. Where are you? So you're from Maryland. What's your background?
I'm Salvadorian, both of my parents. Yeah.
Hey. That's so awesome. I'm so proud of you, by the way. I saw that you were a keynote for the dean, or the dean allowed you to speak. And I said, oh, she has to be the real deal, because these deans do not pass the microphone.
Woo, That was crazy. That was crazy. Oh, I can't get over that still.
You're in the College of Communications?
Yes. So
Oh my God, congratulations. What's your major?
I'm a public relations major.
Public relations. Oh my gosh, all this Latino Caucus stuff is just going to help you. It's going to propel you even
It
further.
genuinely has like given me like a good platform to kind of just base like all of the things that I want to do. Like it's like a good base.
Yeah.
So
And you know Ariana Davis, right? She's
my profile.
you go. I know her because she's SMB. She was a little bit over my time. Like I was maybe a few years younger, but I have connected with her offline and she's amazing.
Yeah,
You have an amazing network, and I hope you reach into all those parts when it's your time.
Yeah, I definitely will, because that time is coming.
That time is coming. When is your graduation? When are you set for graduation?
May 2022.
Good. And just remember, your time at Penn State is short, and you're making an impact. And I know Latino Caucus, you let it go to the next person, and you let the next person, when everybody adds their little bit, and the fact that it's still going, I think it's going to be 30 years soon. Or maybe it already has 30 years.
89, since 89.
So 32.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's around, like I'm telling you, I thought I brought it back from the brink of death, barely. And the fact to hear that it's still around, like it shows that something's working. Something's working, something's clicking, somebody still needs it. And at least, if anything, it gives people a little sense of community. Something to connect to, something to look forward to. And at least somebody's waving, the Latino flag and talking about what we need.
No, but really. So how about like going back to kind of like, looking back and seeing the people that have had like a big impact or an influence in your life? Like, does anyone stick out, and in what sense did they, influence or impact you? It doesn't even have to be related to Penn State. Like it can be like maybe a mentor outside of Penn State, or just, someone that has left that legacy in you.
This one's a hard one. I think so my person is a Penn State professor, and I took her classes. I think I took every class that she offered, and her name's Dr. Garcia, and I've lost touch with her, mostly because you graduate and life just gets really busy. I'm a mom of kids. I have 2 children now. I'm a grad student. I'm a teacher. I work. But the reason I think that she was really impactful for me was because it was somebody that helped me connect what I was doing as a student leader to the larger world and what it was that I wanted to do for myself as a person. And her classes taught me a lot, especially, when you think about, Penn State's really good, is a really good school academically. And when you have those professors that take an interest in your work, that help you with the research papers, that really help you expand, they're really preparing you for life. And I feel like she taught me a lot in the class, but outside of the class, that really prepared me for just life in general. So I think she was really influential.
Do you remember her name? Like her
Yes, her name's Dr. Alyssa Garcia.
Alyssa Garcia.
Yeah, and she was on. She's no longer at Penn State. She's at another school. And she was on leave the year that I graduated. So that's why it's it was I haven't like really been in touch with her, but I still think back to her classes, and I still think back to what I learned in her classes.
And then last question, is there a person that really changed the course of your life by something that he or she did?
This one's super cheesy, probably my husband. So my husband, I met at a Dominican student conference. And he actually drove all the way from New Jersey to Penn State to ask me out. We have been together. Crazy. Yeah, impressive, right? We've been together since 2009. So he was somebody that like, he was a few years older than me. Like he's only like 3 years older than me, but he really like guided me through student leadership. Like he was always there on the phone. He would drive up for Noche Latina, just to like see the event. We're married and we have 2 kids now. We've been married for 6 years now, and we've been together for 13. So
wow,
definitely husband is very impactful. You're very young, so you have no rush, but the person that you marry will have the biggest impact on your life. So just tread lightly, tread carefully, don't waste any time on anybody. Not worth it.
That's good advice.
and you're still young, so you have a lot of time. But I always, I do say that, the people that you spend time with, especially in your 20s, they either will add or they'll subtract. So if anybody's subtracting, they gotta go.
They gotta go. And I
taking your time, they gotta go.
That's a perfect way to stop this recording.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, before we go into